Okay, hi everyone. Just wanted to share my recently completed uh, Call of Cthulhu um, adventure that I ran as the keeper. Went pretty well. So this was the first time I ran Call of Cthulhu with, I would say, like a full group. So I had four players, um, and as the picture implies, the main bad guys were the serpent people. Um, and the setup was that the player characters are invited to this castle in fictional castle in somewhere in northern Hungary in 1920, I think, 1924. Um, and I had the way I set it up was initially they're invited. The invitation is on psychic paper. Um, so the text could be pretty much anything. My players didn't manage to detect that. They knew that it was, some of them were able to detect that it had some kind of power, but they weren't able to find what it was. And then they went to the village and investigated a bit there. And the village priest, had been driven away. And then they went into the castle. Now, in the Call of Cthulhu rules, so the serpent people have a potion where you are suggestible to them. And unfortunately, my players didn't find clues that I had put in the adventure to be warned not to eat. Um, but anyway, they've managed to find a way around that. I mean, the rules were not vague of like how to resist it, other than you can you can like it can be flushed out of your system basically after it's like D10 plus 10 days. What I did was I had them make an intelligence check when one of the serpent people was trying to control them. I figured that would be a fair check to handle that. And sometimes they passed, sometimes they didn't, obviously, with the dice. To make this map, I used a real castle floor plan, and it worked out pretty well. This is like a 18th, 19th century real castle in Poland, but obviously I, you know, fictionalized the interior a bit, um, added some things. It worked out pretty well, and it definitely made it easier than like drawing my own castle by hand. So I think it worked well enough. Um, so the player characters were there. The Serpent Men, their goal was to either take the player characters as slaves or capture them so they could use their appearance and their documents to go out and into the you know uh, wider world to advance their goals. Um, that didn't happen. So basically, my players managed to um, kill both the main bad guy, Serpent Man, and like his second in command. In one case, they confronted him. I thought that they were gonna. I wasn't expecting them to pass their sanity check, because when you have a Serpent Man encounter, you have to do a sanity check, and if you fail, it's 1d6 sanity loss. So if you roll five or six, you suffer temporary insanity. I think it's five, but I know definitely six. It's temporary insanity. So I was kind of expecting that to happen, at least to one or two of them, but it didn't. And then when the combat started, um, one of them managed to fire and kill the Serpent Man like first shot of the combat, he was shot dead immediately, which was pretty crazy. Um, and then there was another the other confrontation after that shot was fired. The second in command serpent man like entered with all the servants, and then one of the other players drew his gun and shot him. First shot, the serpent man was defeated. So I was really not expecting that to happen at all. And then the other part was of the kind of the investigation. I found this like free dungeon mapper, so I drew out the castle, like the catacombs, basically, where the Serpent Men were trying to mine in this area. Because my idea was the castle was on top of like a dead volcano, but there was a thermal vent. Um, the other solution I had in mind to this was so since the Serpent Men are reptiles, they would need a lot of heat, and especially this was set like in October in Hungary, so it would be getting pretty cold, especially like in the closer to the Carpathian Mountains kind of region. So the other solution I had in mind that they didn't do, well, they kind of did at the end, but what they could just because one of the clues was a schematic of the duct work basically, so they could go in here and like disable the furnace that was in the northern room, and then turn that off, and then basically the serpentmen would like be almost dead very quickly from lack of heat, um, and then they could free the other prisoners who had been invited, like the player characters were previously, the NPCs, to rescue them. Um, but yeah, that was a pretty good. I think it was a pretty good game. I think the Serpent Men were a decent villain, especially for me to run as the GM. Like their motivations are pretty kind of obvious. So, like in one of the Lovecraft stories, it's like they worship the snake god Yig. So, um, and it was set in autumn when in the mythos when Yig needs to feed. So I thought, well, maybe they're doing something to help that along. And But I didn't really go in with a defined goal necessarily of the Serpent Men. Just that they are the bad guy, and this is what's kind of happening. I kind of preferred to let that play out over the sessions. It took about 3 sessions to play out, which I think is good for a Call of Cthulhu investigation, for one kind of adventure within a campaign, maybe. And Yeah, so I think I did pretty well. The one thing I don't know if I was good at getting the horror across, because I was kind of worried sometimes it was a little too pulpy, but there wasn't a ton of combat, which I like to avoid generally. So, which is why when I was coming up with the adventure, I thought, well, you could just turn off the heating system, and that would deal with the serpent men and their servants, um, things like that. Or I don't know. The players could have just run away. Like you can just escape the castle and escape on your own, and that would have been enough. Um, so yeah, that's what I did. The other thing I just wanted to talk about was how I have been keeping the. Well, okay, I will talk about two things. One is how I keep the time when I do Call of Cthulhu, the in-game time. So what I generally do is, depending on the activity, I tend to make every time the players do something substantial, like that's like an hour on the in-game clock. So if they go to talk to an NPC, um, I have that be like 1 hour total between like going to the place, having the conversation, and then leaving. This one, I kind of was a little looser with it just because um, I it was a physically smaller setting, so I was kind of keeping a loose track of time of like things taking maybe more like a half hour instead of a full hour, that kind of thing. But that's what I've been doing. That generally works well, and that way, like if the players say, "Okay, my character is going to bed for the day," or my character has to eat, because that is in the rules actually. Like you have to at least mark the time that they need to take care of their basic needs. That's like 1 hour in game time. You could abstract that, but I think trying to at least make an effort to keep the timing is important because I think as the keeper, you want to always think about how, like, what are the NPCs doing in the background? Like, what could they be doing? I mean, you could randomize that with dice rolls. I just kind of think about it in my head, like, what would this kind of character be doing? Especially after the investigators have kind of alerted themselves to their to the NPCs or vice versa. And then the other thing was about the running the combat in Call of Cthulhu. So I saw in one of the Facebook groups there was someone saying, "Oh, I have a hard time running the combat. It doesn't seem to flow as well in Call of Cthulhu." And I had two thoughts about that. So one is I think getting just like reading the rules first of all, always important. Um, and then I would also even say like getting like a some kind of cheat sheet, like even if you just write it down by hand or if you get like the keeper screen, either one. I mean, I think that helps a lot just to have a quick reference. There's probably something online someone's made like a quick reference sheet for uh for the seventh edition combat rules because they're really not that complicated. You every character can pretty much take player character can take one action per combat round, um, and then you get bonus dice for certain things, you get penalty dice for other things, and you move in dexterity order, which has some modifiers. It's really a pretty simple system. It's pretty elegant, but I think the second thing is misunderstanding what the purpose of the combat is for in Call of Cthulhu, because it's really not the kind of game I think where you should be, where like the combat is necessarily the first solution to anything. Um, and also, I think this is where more of the role playing comes in. Is like a Call of Cthulhu character, even if they're like a military or person or police officer kind of character, like they're still an ordinary person, right? So even if they have the training, like they're not like a D&D current D&D like superhero where uh, they're gonna like roll into roll on the floor and then draw their gun and fire it, and then they're gonna uh, you know uh, use another action to take the knife from their belt and like throw it at the bat. It's like that's not really the purpose. So it's a little more visceral, and I think the one action per round gives a better sense of like, okay, I'm like I have to make a decision now. This isn't like a common thing that I have to experience. That this character has to experience, um, even if they do have the training, right? So I think that's another part of it. But otherwise, I would say I think the combat in Call of Cthulhu is not that hard to learn. It's not very complex, and that's to its kind of benefit, right? So it's not really meant to be a very granular combat system. Um, so uh, I think I'll just wrap it up here. If you like the idea of this investigation, feel free to use it in your own games. Um, it's yeah, I had fun running it. I think I did pretty well, but I still think there's areas where I could improve, like with the horror elements and that kind of thing, making it more horror driven, perhaps. Because sometimes I felt like it was in a kind of more like a pulp adventure. But anyway, um, Also could be because my players rolled pretty well when they had their sanity checks, so it just kind of the dice kind of um, affected the outcome. But all right, anyway, hope you found this interesting, and if you like the videos where I talk about Call of Cthulhu and you want to see more, just leave a comment, and thanks for watching.